Hi, I am joined here today by Max from Spark Agency. And today we're going to talk a little bit about a project he's done called Spark Core, or is it Spark One?
It's
So
both. Hi,
it's both.
Andreas.
So welcome, Max. I think first and foremost, before we get into it, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and Spark Agency?
Yes. Well, my name is Max. I'm somewhat of a web developer, but by training, I'm an engineer. And in my heart, I'm an engineer. And Spark is a web agency, and we build visually exclusively, and we only build in Toddle. So there's no other tool besides the backend that we use for programming websites. Obviously, we are pretty new because Toddle is pretty new as well. It's a young company, it's a young tool, but we saw an opportunity last year when we discovered Toddle, and we were like, we think that's going to be the future, um, and let's ride the wave. And so we went for all in on Toddle, and so we are Toddle developers, I guess.
You sure
Yes.
are. And so you made this sort of library and a template actually, which is the Spark One and Spark Core. So first, can you tell us a little bit about what is it?
Yes. As you said, there are two parts. One part is Spark Core. This is a total package. And the other part is Spark One. This is a template. Package means, for those who are not too familiar with the packaging in Toddle, it's basically like a JavaScript library, something you can install in your project. They are all open source, so you can see the source code and they're free to use. And you can extend your Toddle project's functionality by packages. So the one part is the package itself, Spark Core. This is a collection of around 30 components, but they are all unstyled. So it basically looks like nothing when you pull it onto the canvas in Toddle. And the reasoning behind that is that you can use it to build the exact UI that you want. We just have the logic in there, the heavy lifting basically in the back end, or not the back end, in the back. But you have to do all the styling. It looks like nothing.
So in the end, what we're talking about here is a large set of components that people can use in their Toddle applications that you
Uh,
build for them, so they don't have to, like in Toddle by default, everything is built from scratch, right? We don't ship with any pre-built components or anything like that, but you can install and grab as much as you want from third parties and community builders like you, right? So you mentioned a little bit this sort of differentiation between the core, like where the core is a set of components and one is this template, right? So why do
yeah.
you have that separation?
One problem with many UI libraries is that they come styled to you. So they have a styling assigned. It's the same in React or you you name a framework. You have a Material UI is a good example. Material UI for React. I used that in the past. It's really nice. It has a lot of features. It looks nice by default. But if you want to change something, you always have to override stuff. And you end up writing CSS overrides on CSS overrides and adjusting the theme. And the theme is a theme that they did and a theming system that they did. And probably you need to extend it or override it and place other components in that are not part of this. And in the end, it's a mess. So the idea was to have a component library that does not have any styling at all, so that you don't have to fight against it. You have to fight from the beginning because there's nothing there. So it is still work. It's not like you drag and drop it and everything is done. But all the hard parts are done already. So you
Oh, so
just need to style it.
you have no styling, but you deliberately made it easy to add styling.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, it is easy to add styling because there is none there.
yeah.
You don't need to override. I think we did like four styles. that are adjustment styles that make sense for that component, but you probably won't see those.
Just for like basic layout, it's not flowing all over. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but what if someone's sitting saying that's all nice, but I don't really want to do that. I just want to get a bunch of components that work and start building some stuff, and I don't want to start overwriting everything.
Thank you, Andreas. This is Spark 1 then. So this is the community template. Spark 1 is basically an implementation of Spark Core. So we took all the basic components and built a already styled library on top of that. And that one has a few more components as well, because we only included components that are hard in Spark Core. So things where you need accessibility stuff, internal logic, that we put into Spark Core. If it's just a card, this is just a box. So there's no need to have a library for that. It takes like half a minute to do that in total. But we included those parts in Spark 1. The card is actually a bad example because that is not included in Spark 1. But
But can we expect that coming in the future?
I don't think so. Like I said, this is a card is basically a div. So there is no need to have a component library for that. I think that made sense in the React times, but not in the Toddle times. Toddle is so fast in adjusting the design to your needs that I don't think it makes sense to have that in a component library, honestly.
Yeah. And so one of the things here, one of the big benefits of this two like split solution between the finished template where that's just plug and play, is also that other people can build templates, right?
Yes.
So we're already beginning to see that people are taking either just cloning the template you made and changing the styling, or really rebuilding new components, like whole new things based on the toddle core, because it handles all the complicated logic, right?
Yes. Spark Core, not
Yeah,
Toddle
sorry.
Core. Just want to make sure.
Yes, Spark for sure. Yeah. What did I say?
Toddle Core.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. The thing is, both products, I want to call it, I don't know, libraries are open source. So you can either clone the Spark Core package and do your own version if you like. Just a small disclaimer, it's really hard. It's not fun at all. So if you, I don't know, want to suffer for a few weeks, do that. But Spark 1 is also, it's a community template, so you can install it and see the whole source code. So if you don't like what we did with the button, yeah, adjust it. So it's yours, it's not ours. You don't have to override anything, just change it. You have the code for it.
You have the components right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you say code, just to
Well,
be clear,
just to be clear, we are working in a visual environment. I still call it code, but for me, it is coding. It's just a different language. It's a visual language, but basically it is coding. But it looks nicer than in VS Code or your editor of choice.
yeah, that makes sense. So one question here is, you mentioned a few times the sort of like, we have this tool and we have all the complicated behaviors in core. What is it makes building a UI library like Spark Core, or like any UI library really? What is it makes it so complicated?
One part is flexibility. If you build a component for your project, you can adjust it to the project, and it just has to do that one thing, and that one thing well. And in a library, you also have specialized components, so it has to do one thing well, but in many cases. So I don't know where you want to place your overlay. Like popover is a good example. Popover is always a pain to build, and I don't know where you want to place it. Is it on top? Is it bottom? Is it left? Is it right? So I need to give you all the options. And also I need to give you the options to animate it, for example. And I could do that with baked in animations, and you can just adjust the milliseconds, so the duration or the easing function or whatever. But what we did is we have everything as small parts that you can style and animate individually so that you can have the exact behavior that you want to have in your app, because we don't know what you want to do with it. And honestly, we are learning Spark Core as well, because it is so flexible. And I'm always like, when I start a new project, I'm building something, and I'm like, I think I can use the Spark dialog for that. Let me see, and I can adjust it that way because it's so flexible.
So I think one example I've heard you use before is like a select list, right? Like a select element. And the first of all, like why couldn't you just use the native, like the browser comes in with a select element? So why not just use that?
Yeah, it's ugly. So the native select usually is very ugly and not very stylable. And I think for decades, JavaScript and CSS developers have found ways around that behavior to make it a little prettier. But in the end, it works fine. If you use the native one, it works. That's good about it. But it does not have all the accessibility features that the standards want for whatever reason. And it's not easy to style. It is ugly by default.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think a lot of it you can't style at all, right? The bit that pops over is not stylable, and it just
Yes.
whatever operating system you're on, that's what it looks like, right?
Yes, and that may be fine. Like if you're, I don't know, a large city, and you don't need a pretty website. You just need something that is accessible and works
Yeah.
fine. Go with that. But if you
But
want
like,
to have something that is branded, it's getting harder with the native elements.
but I know like CSS, right? I can just put in a list and make it display none by default. Put it as absolute, and float it above the select button. Like I can build one like in 5 minutes, can I?
Yeah, but
So
it's
why do I need a fancy library?
yeah, because it's just kind of working.
Mm,
So there are things like focus management. So if you click the first item needs to be focused. Or if you pressed arrow down, the last item needs to be focused. If you pressed arrow up, it should be the first again. And then you should have a rowing focus that you can use the arrow down, arrow up keys for the focus. It should trigger on space, but not on enter. It should close and escape. It's tricky. Like the list of requirements is very long for all these components, and maybe you don't even need all of those in your project, or you don't think you need those in your project. And I'm sure just a div that pops up somewhere does the job somehow. But that's why we build it, so that you don't have to think about it,
mm.
and we don't have to think about it. So we use Spark ourselves. It's not like we build it for all the other people. We build it for ourselves as well.
Yeah, and so do we. We are starting to implement Spark Core components directly into the Toddle editor because a lot of times they're implemented much better than what we had. Like
But you
we
call it toddle core.
occasionally. No. No, we do refer to it as Spark Core when we're not on a podcast. Yeah, but yeah, we use it well. Like a lot of times, the implementation you've done is better than what we had, and we swapped out our own one, right? And I think one of the things we, for example, didn't have on our select was understanding where the select currently is on the screen. Because if you open a select and you're somehow scrolled close to the bottom of the screen, the Spark select will actually make sure that it always opens the list so it's inside the screen. Because if it pops out, it's impossible, right, to click
Yeah,
on it. But those little details, building all that yourself, is very time consuming, right?
and it's
And we
painful.
and we missed one in our implementation, so we're really happy that we can just swap out and say we're going to use this instead, and it's super easy to style so it matches the rest of the data, right?
Especially for everything that pops up somehow.
Mm,
It's really nice to have the logic baked in. So for a dialogue, for example, if you do that you can do that with a div and give it role dialogue. It's kind of fine. Or you can use the native dialogue, which doesn't work that well either. But once you click it, you need to make sure it's on top of everything. And what happens if you click another one? You need to mess with the indexes somehow. That's really hard. And with the current implementation of Spark Core, it's just like you have that dialog somewhere in your code. When you open it, it will be on top. So you don't have to think about that. So there's no clipping or stuff like that going on.
That's
And
perfect.
that's really nice.
Yeah. So, I have a few. We talked a little bit. What do you think is the most common thing people forget when building component libraries?
Accessibility, I'd say.
And accessibility. And so, what does that mean, and why is this important?
Why is it important is maybe a philosophical question. I think that the internet can be the most accessible place on earth. Everyone can go into the internet, regardless of disabilities or location or whatever. And I think it should be baked in every product that you do. We as developers, I think it's my duty to have a product that is as accessible as I can build it. It's never going to be perfect, but I want to get as close to perfect as possible, so everyone can use the app that I built.
So, what would be an example of what Spark does there that maybe you would forget normally when building? Like,
a typical thing is ARIA roles. So screen readers need to know what's going on. When a dialog is a good example. If a dialog pops up, the screen reader needs to know, is the rest of the screen still accessible, or is this hidden away? Because if it doesn't know that it's inert, it will read everything beneath the screen as well, or beneath the dialog. But you cannot do anything with that anyways. So it needs to know this is on top now, and you cannot interact with anything else. And it also needs to know, for example, the severity. Is it a menu? Is it an alert? Is it a dialogue, which can be basically anything? So you need to tell the assistive technology, I think it's called, what is going on, so that people with visual impairments, for example, can use your app.
And so this means by adding these functionality in, like people who are either completely blind or way more commonly have lower vision actually can still use this app. They can still, like, they will have assisted technologies reading all the text that might be difficult to read otherwise, and it'll explain what everything does. Right?
Exactly. So it has most of those things baked in. There are a lot of things you need to add as well. So we don't know what this dialogue is for. So like an ARIA label or description, you need to add this, because basically we cannot guess what this is for, or we need to build 100 different dialogues. So this is one for deleting items, this is one for adding items, but we have an attribute for that. So you
just make it easy to put it in the right place, right?
Exactly. And everything we know it needs to have is baked in, like focus management, for example. If the dialogue is a modal, so it means it is on top and you cannot interact with the page itself, the focus needs to be trapped. So you cannot use the tab key to tap out of that dialogue, and we need to keep it in the dialogue. Simple on small things like that, but it's super annoying to implement, and the list is long of stuff that has to be there.
And this is something that I think we maybe all wish that the browser would do for us in a lot of cases, but at least at the current state, that's just not, like, these things aren't in there. Like, things have gotten better in the last couple of years, but there's still a long way to go, I think, before we have a full set of, like, just the most used components being fully accessible and customizable, right?
Yeah, it's getting better with the native dialog, for example. It has a few of those things, or most of those things implemented, but not in all browsers. And it does not work properly in all browsers. So what we also did is basically fixing browser behaviors.
So make sure that the big behavior you have in one place is going to be the same we're using the other browser, right?
Yeah, we can say the name. We need to make sure it works in Safari as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
I think Firefox can give them a fight every
Yeah.
now
Oh,
and then.
yeah. Yeah. Firefox is not too easy as well, but it is tested in all major browsers, even Firefox and Safari. So
Excellent.
you should be
So
fine.
one thing I always has about accessibility is a lot of people think about it as like people who can't see, but obviously the topic is much, much broader. Like keyboard navigation again being a big part. There are people who have a struggle using mouse. I always thought a fun way of looking at it, like it's not necessarily that you can't use a mouse normally, but like I have a daughter that's a year and a half. A lot of times I have a small person in one arm and maybe I need to add something, do something with the other hand, right?
Yes.
Like that kind of accessibility, it can be really important. So I really appreciate when websites and apps let you use the keyboard to navigate because sometimes you only have one arm, right?
Absolutely.
So
And
yeah,
even
having
for
these things built in and having developers not have to think about as much about them all the time is really a huge game changer.
it's not only accessibility, but it's also usability. So even for people who can operate a mouse,
Yeah,
it's nice to have keyboard navigation
for sure.
just
So
built in.
what was some of the, because I mean, in building this, I assume you didn't like just come up with it out of nowhere. Like, what was some of the inspiration you drew upon for building this?
We drew a lot of inspiration from Radix, which is basically the same that we did for Toddle. Radix is the React version of that. So it's an unstyled library that does all the accessibility things. And we almost copied it. We decided not to do a few components because we thought they were outdated or we couldn't come up with a use case ourselves. And we're like, if someone needs that, we'll implement it. But right now, I wouldn't know where to use it. And we added a few. We love to develop apps that work very well on mobile browsers. So we want to have swipe functionality baked in and
Nice.
stuff like that. Things you just expect from a mobile app. There's no reason not to have this in a mobile website.
Nope, that makes a ton of sense. And but like the sort of inspiration there, like for me looking, it's very clear. And also, I think people probably are familiar or heard the name Shadcn, which is almost the equivalent of Spark One. It's more this like library built on top of Radix. In I think a lot of ways the same way that Spark One is built on top of Spark Core, right?
Yes. Well, Shadcn has a few things that we don't have. They have a nice CLI. They have Tailwind baked in and their own AI assistant, I believe.
Oh,
So that's not baked in. But basically, yes. So Shadcn is a styled version of Radix. They added a few components on top of that, but the components that they did themselves are not as well built as the Radix ones, to
oh,
be honest. So
okay. I wouldn't know, but it's good to have that perspective as well.
yeah, well, we try to steal a few things or
Ah,
take inspiration from a few things. We're like, well, like the side menu, it's not well implemented.
okay.
Um,
So what would you say? Because obviously this like Radix and Shared Sienna for React, and this Spark is not just built for Toddle, but it's also built in Toddle. So in that sense, it's quite different. What was the sort of biggest challenges or differences when trying to do this? Like how did that experience? How was that experience different from trying to do it in code?
mm, I think one challenge was that we were the first to do it, and so we had to work very closely with you guys because we came up with issues that no one could foresee, more or less. At least I couldn't, and obviously you didn't either. So we had to work with Jakob from your team a lot to see what's the best way to do that in Todo. Is there something wrong in our thinking, or is there something missing in Todo? And it's 50-50 usually. So that was fun because it hasn't been done in to that extent in Todo. Um, Otherwise, honestly, the experience in Todo was really nice. It was um, the research and the architecture that was really challenging. So
Yeah.
implementing itself wasn't that big of a deal.
How
But
long
I
did
think
it take you roughly to build both the core and one?
the core, I'd say 3 or 4 weeks. Full time, so not healthy full time. I'd say maybe 6 to 8 normal weeks.
Mm.
Um, but yes, it yeah about 4 weeks. But we had I don't want to say we had to start over a few times. We decided to start over a few
Mm.
times because we ran into a path where we had too many limitations, and we're like, can I show this to Andreas? Um, let's start again.
I think a lot of times, like for projects like this, getting the design right, not the visual design, but the component and the system design right, is the biggest challenge, right? And also where something like Radix helps so much because they paved a lot of the way for how to go about it. Just not,
Yes.
of course, in every way, right? Yeah.
So basically, this was our process as well. So we checked how did Radix do it, and if we didn't have a good reason to change it, we didn't. Um, so props to those guys. I learned a lot in the process. I read a lot of their source code, and a lot of those things are really elegant. It's really nice. And last time I touched React, I think it was React 15 or 16. So there were a few things I had to research.
Yeah.
But yeah, learned a lot.
What's this new thing? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Can you use the spread operator on that one? I
Yeah.
haven't seen that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and it's been a real pleasure sort of helping you out and collaborating on this project as well. Like on our side, obviously, there's a few new features that actually came about because what you were building, you said this really makes sense. The biggest one clearly being the ability to override styles on the root element of a component. So if you now select the component toddle, you actually get a full style panel and you can override the styling there, which only affects that current instance of it, right? So it doesn't affect everywhere it's used. Just right here, you can say, I want you to be full width, or can you change your layout or something like that? And that really does just give so much flexibility. And it's really the core of how you style like this core library, right? How do you add the styles tools, all with this new feature of adding component styling, right? Which I
Yes.
think is a huge improvement to Toddle, and we use it everywhere now, all the time, right?
Yeah, it's a game changer.
Yeah, really.
It completely changed the way in that process of building the library. We had to relearn Toddle because that feature changed everything basically. And so we had to think about, before we were those guys that had like 1,000 attributes, German engineers, right? So we have 1,000 attributes for the one component. The component can do anything, just need to configure it. But now with the styling on the root element, if I want to have that part stylable, it needs to be its own component. So everything needs to be composable. And now we have a lot more components, but it's a breeze to work with. So you did a great job on that one. I I think we easily doubled our development speed. I would say even more. Um, it's really nice. So we can build a really complex site in 2 weeks.
That's nice.
Not healthy weeks, but in 2 weeks
Maybe consider building it in 4 weeks.
would be an option.
Yeah. Okay. So if people want to work with you, because I mean, obviously you've already showcased what you could do. Where can they get a hold of you?
The internet.
The
We
internet.
Yeah,
Yes.
we are there. You can either go to spark-agency.io, or you can check out our Toddle projects. They are at spark-pro.dev. And this is where you find the
We will link
documentation.
both.
Yeah. There are a lot of guys that have Spark in their name. So it's not like we can afford spark.com or stuff like that. But yeah, on the Spark Pro website, you can also see the documentation for Spark 1 and Spark Core. We spend a lot of time on that because we believe in proper documentation. and we want people to be able to use our stuff.
Is that the German engineering again?
I guess so. At least I'm not sure if you ever build a machine, but usually the machine manuals are like 10 books like this, and everything is in there. It's all it's not like it's an exciting text, but everything is in there, and you will find it after 20 years. It will be a terrible time when you do the searching, but you will find it.
And that's how you build your, or is it a different approach you took to your documentation?
Yeah, we try to make it visually appealing, and only include the information that you need.
Yeah.
So it's still a lot of text, but it's a complex topic. It's not like programming is easy. And
But
so
I think you did a great job, and I think that especially this, because you have this two different levels approach of, like, if you want to really go crazy and build your own component library and like invent new ideas for interactive components, the Spark core library like just is all the right building blocks for doing that. And if you want to just use a bunch of components that's always done, adjust the styling to your own theme, just go and clone the Spark 1 template. You don't have to worry about all the details because you're just using all the building blocks already there, right? So I think
it kind of works somehow.
it kind of just works. It's fantastic. It's so exciting to see how many projects are using this now, being kicked off us, including, of course, us incorporating into the Toddle editor, right? So it really has been a massive game changer in the whole community, and like the feedback has been incredible.
Yeah.
Like my team is buzzing about it all the time.
Yeah, I
Uh,
love that.
so it's really cool. We're really happy. It's such a big deal for like the whole Toddle community to have something like this that makes building so much easier.
Yeah, thank you for your kind words.
Yeah, and I think let's end on that one. Thank you very much for joining me and talking about Spark and explaining what it is. We're linking of course, the links to both the documentation website and the Spark agency in the description, and go and try it out. You can find it as the very first template when you create a new Toddle project. Right there, you can start from Spark 1 and check it out and see how it works. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.